Kia ora koutou. I'm Lex, a capability advisor from Charities Services, and I'm joined by Lisa, a registration analyst. Thanks for being with us for today's webinar on the benefits and obligations of being a registered charity.
This webinar is for new charities, new officers of registered charities, and anyone needing a refresher. It will help you understand why you're registered, the benefits you receive, and the obligations that come with those benefits.
A little bit of housekeeping before we start. Please ensure your computer speaker is unmuted and check your internet connection if you encounter any issues. There is the option for you to turn on live captions for this webinar to improve your accessibility. You would have received instructions on how to do this in your emails. Please note that these captions are auto-generated and might not always be accurate. However, they will be edited for accuracy in the recording, which we'll have available on our website. We are recording this webinar, and we will email the link to everyone who registered, along with the resources we mentioned. Please feel free to share that email with your officers when you receive it, in case they weren't able to be here today. In the unlikely event that our sound or image cuts out, we'll work through any technical difficulties and aim to be back with you as soon as possible.
We will have time for your questions at the end, but please use the Q&A button at the top of the window to ask your questions as they come to mind. We just ask that you refrain from asking questions specific to your charity. If your questions aren't answered, you can always email us at info@charities.gov.nz.
Today, we'll be looking at the benefits of being a registered charity, the obligations or legal requirements that registered charities must meet, whether registration is necessary for your charity, and the steps to take if you decide to deregister. Being a registered charity brings with it a number of benefits. One of the main benefits is that you can officially call yourself a registered charity, and your charity's information will be listed on the charity's register. This register provides a summary of your charity's activities, including your annual return, detailing your income, expenses, and yearly activities. It is publicly accessible, allowing anyone, including potential donors and volunteers, to learn more about your charity and its work, thereby increasing public trust. Additionally, registration means that Charity Services has reviewed your rules and purpose, confirming that you operate exclusively for charitable purposes. This assurance helps people trust that your activities are genuinely charitable. It's important to note that under Section 37 of the Charities Act 2005, it is illegal to call yourself a registered charity if you're not actually registered under the Charities Act 2005. You can find out more about this on the Benefits and Obligations page on our website. As a registered charity, you might become eligible for some tax benefits from inland revenue, such as exemption from paying income tax on all or most of your charity's income, and donee status, which means that if people donate to your charity, they can claim a 33% tax rebate from inland revenue on eligible donations. But remember, tax and any tax benefits are administered by inland revenue, so always contact them directly if you have any questions for them. Being registered can also give you access to certain funders who only support registered charities. This doesn't apply to all funders though, so if you're registering just to get funding, we highly recommend checking with the funder first to find out exactly what they require. An important note, Charity Services doesn't provide funding, but we have a page on our website called How to Fund Your Charity that gives examples of funders in New Zealand. We will send you the link to the page with the recording. And if you are registered, you also get access to our newsletter, resources, and the events we create like this webinar today.
So that's a summary of the benefits of being registered with Charity Services. We're now going to take a look at the obligations you need to be aware of, because being a registered charity comes with certain responsibilities. All registered charities must fulfill their legal obligations as part of their registration with Charity Services. Firstly, you must operate according to the Charities Act 2005. This might seem quite broad, but as registered charities are registered under the Act, it is important to always remember this. Registered charities also have to legally provide information to charity services when requested under Section 51 of the Charities Act 2005. To be registered, your organisation must have charitable purposes. This is what your organisation has been set up to achieve. You may call this your overall mission or goal. There are 4 categories of charitable purposes, which are set out in the Charities Act 2005. This is relief of poverty, it's advancement of education, advancement of religion, or other purposes that benefit the community. Examples of this could be protecting the environment and supporting disability. Registered charities must follow their rules document, which can be called different things like a trust deed, constitution, charter, or even a will or act of parliament. It's important for you and your officers to know these rules well, as they guide what your charity does and how it operates. So be sure to give any new board or committee members a copy when they join your charity. Registered charities must file an annual return with Charity Services within 6 months of their financial year end. This means submitting an annual return form and either a performance report for Tiers 3 and 4 or financial statements for Tiers 1 and 2. The performance report must follow the standard for reporting set by the External Reporting Board and include both financial and non-financial information about your charity. These reports help governance groups, members, funders, and donors make informed decisions. It's important that they accurately reflect your charity's activities, transactions, and balances, giving a complete picture of what your charity does. Filing them on time is important to avoid the risk of deregistration. You will also need to keep us informed of any changes to your charity's details by completing an Update Details form through your account. This includes updates to your charity's legal name, contact details such as postal or email addresses, officers, including if any become disqualified, changes in rules or charitable purposes, and balance date as this impacts reporting deadlines. You must also tell people you are registered and provide a registration number when someone collects funds for you, like over the phone or online. This requirement is important as it helps protect the public from donating to fake charities. And of course, you need to understand that most of your organization's information will be publicly available. Unless Charity Services decides it's in the public interest to withhold certain information, it will be published on the charity's register. This includes your officers, but not their addresses or date of birth, your rules, your annual returns, and the financial statements/performance reports you provide with them.
Lastly, don't forget that you could have other obligations under the law which are entirely separate from your registration with us. These obligations could be around things like tax and employment and selling or giving away goods. There's quite a lot to keep in mind, but we have a useful page on our website called Charities Obligations Under the Law that has information about these things, so I recommend you take a look. A link to that page will be included in the resources.
So to recap, as a registered charity, your benefits include official status and public listing on the Charities Register, potential tax exemptions and donee status, access to certain funders, and access to our newsletter and resources.
And your obligations include operating according to the Charities Act 2005, ensuring your purposes and activities are charitable and benefit the public, filing an annual return and performance report each year, keeping your charity's details up to date, providing your registration number when collecting donations, and providing information to charity services when requested under Section 51 of the Charities Act 2005. Now let's talk about whether your charity needs to be registered. Not everyone knows that registration is voluntary. Some charities register because they think they have to. That's not true. It is an option available to charities. For some, the obligation of being registered can outweigh the benefits. For instance, if your income is below $1,000, you may not need to register since inland revenue doesn't require taxes on the first $1,000 of income. Donee status allows donors to claim a 33% tax rebate on donations. When you register a charity, Charity Services notifies Inland Revenue, which then decides whether to grant donee status. Some charities qualify for donee status without being registered, though. But if you apply for it during registration, Inland Revenue will automatically consider it. Regarding funding, only some funders require applicants to be registered charities. Check with your funders to see if this applies to your charity.
So what should you know if you think your charity might be better off not being registered? You can choose to be deregistered at any time, and it is a simple process. Just log into your account and click on the Deregistration tab. However, there are some implications to consider. Firstly, there are tax implications. Deregistering can affect your taxes. If your charity has significant assets, it's important to discuss your tax situation and the consequences of deregistration with Inland Revenue. There is also asset distribution. After deregistering, your charity has 12 months to distribute its assets to another registered charity or for charitable purposes. If not distributed within this time, the assets will be taxed by Inland Revenue. Finally, donee status. A deregistered charity might lose its donee status from Inland Revenue, so it's wise to check with Inland Revenue if you're considering deregistration. And of course, you will not be able to call yourself a registered charity once you have deregistered.
Thanks, Lisa. Now we've come to the Q&A part of the webinar. Please type your questions into the Q&A box if you haven't done so already. We'll do our best to get through as many questions as we can. We do ask for you to please not ask questions specific to your charity. If you do have specific questions, please send us an email. Our email address is on the slide. Bring up the questions. Questions are just loading now. First question, will you be covering the new re-registering requirements?
I'm not.
Should I take this one?
Yes, you can take that one.
I think the new re-registration requirements that you're referring to are with New Zealand Companies Office. Charity Services is not requiring people to re-register if they are currently registered. If you've got questions about the re-registration process, you must contact Companies Office directly, as they're the ones who are requiring you to re-register with them.
Yeah, I was going to say that potentially as well, dependent on whether you're an informal group or incorporated group. That's the changes. So we can't answer to that.
Fair enough. Next question. Are we allowed to still operate if we choose to deregister with you?
Yes, 100%. You are still able to operate. You just won't be able to call yourself a registered charity. The main thing that the Act provides is a form of transparency and accountability to the larger charities. So if there's no need to actually register for these extra benefits, you can still function completely as a non-for-profit group.
Fair enough. Makes sense. Next question. We're just going through the process of formalizing our charity, including going through formal registration. Are we able to change or adjust our charity's rules after it's been lodged? So making some changes to the rules that they operate under, and how do they do this?
Well, I can take that. It's relatively easy, as I think on the slides before we said that you can just go through and send a new form that has changes. However, the only implications that can come about is if the rules change how you function or the charitable purpose of your charity. So if your rules are about any form of private pecuniary profit or winding up, or may affect the actual functionality of being able to give a public benefit, in that case, it may affect your rules, and we will have to look that over. However, if it doesn't change the charitable purpose and the means, and it's just a form of functionality within the structure of your organization, that will not necessarily create a large issue.
Fair enough. And the mechanism that you use to do that, just logging into your dashboard, there's a button at the top that says Update Charity Details. You can use that to change or provide an update about almost everything with your charity, your legal name, adding and removing officers, your contact information, uploading a new rules document if it's been submitted. Any change you need to submit, an update details form is going to be your first and most of the time only stop that you need to make with us.
And again, a good way to think about this is that, again, this is for transparency. We need these updated documents so we know what's going on and so the public can know what's going on. So if the changes in your rules would change any of that perception potentially, that is a good, does it change the functionality of your charity or does it just change how the people within it work with each other? Is kind of a good way to go about it.
And if someone's changing their rules, do they need to seek legal advice?
Depending again on what specific rules they are changing, we always say if you can seek independent legal advice, that is always beneficial.
Okay. But not absolutely mandatory.
Not absolutely mandatory. You can do it without seeking legal advice. Again, it's just beneficial if you're making very specific changes to your constitutional document.
Fair enough. Next question. Can you explain the difference between Tier 1 to Tier 4 charities? I can
Yeah, Lex can do that.
Okay, so Tiers 1 through 4 are the different tiers for financial reporting and your annual return every year. And it's primarily determined by your operating expenditure and whether or not you have something called public accountability. It's unfortunately too much to go into in this webinar right now, but we do have a lot of resources on the website under the reporting section, as well as some recent webinars about changes to the reporting that go into the Tier 1 to Tier 4 differences. So Tiers 1 to Tier 4, primarily about reporting. And as we mentioned earlier, it changes the type of document you'll submit along with your annual report. But have a look through the reporting section and get in touch with us if you have any specific questions. Next question, can we get a summary of this presentation? I'll take this one.
Yeah, sure.
As mentioned, a recording of it will be available in the near future. It's currently being recorded. Once it's been edited and the captions have been corrected and updated, that'll be available. In terms of a summary, this presentation is essentially a summary of a number of separate resources, and those resources will all be linked when we send out the recording so that they'll be absolutely available to you. The next question. Can you please say a bit more about deregistration of a charity and the distribution of assets? Do you want to take this one?
Well, I don't actually. I think that you might be a little bit better at that one.
Fair enough. I'll try to kind of consider this as two questions. The first, deregistration. It's an honestly very, very straightforward process. Your organization's rules document will have clauses in place to determine what process your organization should take to decide to deregister.
Yeah, and all charities will have to have a wind-up clause, which is, upon wind-up, you either have to give it to charitable purposes or to another charity that has either similar or, specific wording. But essentially, it means that you must, depending on the amount of assets that you have, because if it's a large amount, and if those assets are held by your charity and your charity no longer functions, it cannot be held by that charity. So it has to just be either moved, gifted, donated, transferred to another charitable function, organization, or charitable purpose. And as we said, there's those four main reasons: relief, poor, education. You can distribute those assets because they are no longer being used for charity.
And of course, that's specifically in reference to winding up.
Yes.
If your organization is opting to voluntarily deregister but continue operating, you simply have to be aware of potential tax implications from not distributing those assets because the entity still exists, but is no longer registered.
Very correct.
But once you've followed your process in your rules to decide to deregister. And again, if you're distributing your assets, follow the process in your rules and the requirements that they be distributed to exclusively charitable purposes. Simply follow that process, then log into your dashboard. There's a button on the left-hand side that says deregister. Click on that. It's a 3-question form. You'll need to provide some information like specific dates and amounts at the closing and stuff like that. But it's a very straightforward process once you follow your internal organization's own process for making the decisions and taking the actions. The next question. If we were deregistered in 2 years and then re-registered 2 years later, are you able to claim tax rebate for the 2 years you were deregistered? This question, unfortunately, we're not able to answer. You will need to contact Inland Revenue. Like we said, all taxes are administered by Inland Revenue. We do not administer the taxes. We do not administer the requirements of the taxes. If you've got any questions about whether or not you can claim something or need to declare something or anything like that, contact Inland Revenue directly. Next question. Are these benefits and obligations the same as the company's office?
Well, if you're a charity that is a company, then yes, they're similar, but I'm not.
I think this is asking if company's office and charity services do the same thing. Registration with charity services is separate from New Zealand Companies Office, and as such, it's for different reasons, and we do different things.
So you can register as a company first, and then you would register as a charity, but we are not the same.
Yeah. So because they're for different reasons and different purposes, the benefits you receive are separate, and the obligations, unfortunately, we can't speak to the obligations about the company's office, but contact them if you're incorporated with them and you have questions about it. Next question. Do we still have to lodge updated information with incorporated societies as we're also a registered charity?
I think that you actually is suggested that if you are incorporated either as a society or as a company, you should always be informing the company's office as well as charity services, because as we said just before, we are two separate services, and unfortunately we don't necessarily share that information. So if you are making changes, you will also have to update it and let the company's office know.
And one thing to keep in mind is if you're changing things like your legal name or your purpose or your rules document, those changes must be submitted to New Zealand Companies Office first. And they must be finalized before you then provide us with the update. Because if we receive a change to a charity's legal name and that charity is incorporated, but the legal name hasn't changed at the company's office, we can't process that change until the legal change has happened at Incorporated Society's office.
However, those are for the main ones, as Lex said, changes to legal name, changes to purposes, and changes to large rules. Those are the ones that have to be done. Changes to officer names, less so.
Yeah, adding an officer, changing your contact information.
Yeah.
Yes, company's office should absolutely be up to date with that as well, but make sure you're updating that with us as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Next question. Can you please clarify the circumstances that come up where registration status and number must be provided and to whom? I think this question is referring to potential benefits of being registered where people ask for proof that you are registered.
Oh, okay.
So, and also for collecting donations and stuff.
Oh, yeah. Well, you get a registration number. Once you're registered, you get a registration number, and it's CC register, your number, and that is actually what is being used. And if anybody once you give that out, they can put it into the charities register and view all of the information of your charities.
Yeah.
But it's only done once you are registered.
Yeah. As we said, the register is public, and that is by design. So anyone can look up an organization by a number of different factors, including area of operation, type of activity, name, and registration number. So if you've got people who are collecting donations,
Yeah.
providing that registration number or making it available to them so that they can look up your organization on the register, see what you're about, see your information, know that you're legitimate, because people do ask us. I got asked about being requesting donations and whether or not a charity is legitimate and if they're allowed to do that. So having that information available to people who are knocking on doors or collecting on the street, absolutely important. If you're applying to a funder,
It's for funders, yeah.
Yeah.
The main one I would say, is for either the collection of funds or the allocating of funds, so that we know, again, it's the transparency, where it's going, who it's for, and exactly how it's being used. So in cases where those things are being moved around, or,
Yeah, if a funder has in their form, what's your charity's registration number, then that's something you'll probably need to fill in order to apply for that funding. And again, that number is just simply the easiest way for them to look you up on the public register.
it's like your little username into Google. You put it in, search it up, your information is there.
Yeah. Next question. Re-registering for companies, what if you're incorporated or a company with charitable status? Does this affect them? So again, registration with charity services and incorporation with the company's office, whether that's incorporation as a trust or a society or a company, that incorporation is separate from your registration with charity services. If information about the organization changes, you have to update both of us if you're registered in both places. But the requirement to re-register as an incorporated society with New Zealand Companies Office is a requirement that comes from New Zealand Companies Office. So if you're having questions about that re-registration, you need to contact them directly. If you're currently not a registered charity and you're applying to re-register that charity with us, then that's a different question. And as part of that application, you would simply provide your updated information. Do you provide advice to charities boards or to CEOs about working with their boards?
What?
We
I don't.
we don't,
No,
unfortunately.
I'm sorry. That's why I stopped from you. I was like, can I answer?
That's fine. That would come under legal advice. We can't provide legal advice and telling you how your organization should operate is just not something we can do. I can, however, point you to a number of resources. We have some governance information and tools available on our website. There's also a service called CommunityNet Aotearoa that have a very large number of very, very useful tools and resources to assist with governance. And as always, your first stop is going to be your rules document and your governance policies and procedures, because those documents are what tell you the thing that tells you how your organization does things.
The best thing you could do is really know your rules and documents, because if you know them well, and sometimes, it may be easy if you're a new charity starting out to use a template from one online and, think that you might need everything in there, but you might not, and it doesn't always fit. So please check your rules, and, you can make them because we will check them. So make them work for you.
Yeah. Next question. I wonder if it's worth registering a parent-teacher association separately if our school is already registered.
Well, you can if you would like. You can you can have multiple. You can have two charities doing the same thing. You can work together as a form of two associations. It really just depends on the structure of your own charity and how you want that to function. If you would like to have more independence, I would say, because at the end of the day, they would still be two separate charities, and you could do work. You can donate to each other. However, as I say, they are two separate charities, and you will have to still do the same reporting for that independent charity that you're doing there. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of whether or not it's worth registering, unfortunately, we can't tell you if you should apply to be registered. As we said, registration with us is entirely optional.
Mm-hmm.
So if the PTA is considering separately registering with us, have a look at the obligations that come with registration. You'll have to file annually every year. You'll have to keep us up to date with any changes to your details, including changes to your officers, and weigh those obligations against the potential benefits that you would receive. So look at your specific organization's situation, whether or not that organization would benefit from those potential benefits, and decide whether or not those benefits outweigh the obligations that come with registration.
Yes.
And if you're still on the fence, you can possibly seek independent legal advice. Yeah. Do we need to have the performance report audited by an accountant or auditor? Whether or not you need to be audited or reviewed is determined by a couple of things. The first of which is your rules document. If your rules say your reports need to be audited, you have to follow your rules, so they'll need to be audited. If you are over a certain expenditure threshold consistently, then you'll have a statutory obligation to be reviewed or audited regardless of what your rules say. What I'd recommend is, if you have an accountant or an auditor that you currently work with, have a talk to them. We have the thresholds and requirements for audit and review available on our website, again, under the reporting section. And yeah, have a look at your rules, see what they say.
But again, it's not, you don't necessarily, if they're of the lower tiers, not necessarily, but
yeah, if it's in your rules, you have to. But if it's not in your rules, it's a choice you'll have to make. And again, whether or not making that choice outweighs the benefits of doing so. Next question. We're planning on deregistering our charity. What will we still need to do the annual report to us?
Is it to us?
CC. I'm assuming that's us. I can take this one if you'd like.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So if you're voluntarily deregistering, you will provide us with the effective date of that deregistration. If that date is after your financial year end, you will be able to file that annual return, but you'll only be able to do so before the deregistration comes into effect. Keep in mind, however, that because registration is optional, you can choose to deregister at any time. And if you choose to deregister, once you're deregistered, you won't have the obligation to file. The way I would normally recommend making this decision is consider whether or not you want that information to be publicly available. For example, your organization is temporarily inactive, so you want to deregister so that when you reactivate, you can reapply for re-registration and then go from there. You'll probably want people to see your final annual return to see where it was at that point. And then it won't look like you've just skipped a year because you didn't have time to file or something.
Mm-hmm.
So another instance is if you're closing down and winding up, having that final annual return to show exactly where all your money and assets were distributed to.
Yeah.
So have a think about what it would mean for your organization to not file that final annual return.
Yeah.
And again, depending on where the effective date of deregistration falls, will determine whether or not you're able to file an annual return for a given period.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. Can you charge for charitable services, and are there limits as to how much?
Yes, you can technically charge for a charitable service. However, they have to be reasonable within market value. And even then, it's specific to the remuneration of the officers. And when it comes to charging for specific services, the fee itself can't be so high that it limits a sufficient portion of the public. I'm sorry, I can't actually tell you specifically how much that would be, as it is very case dependent, depending on what your charity does, what services it provides. But essentially, a rule of thumb would be if the fee is such that it would essentially limit a large portion or a sufficient portion of the public from being able to participate, that is not okay. And secondly, if there's any private pecuniary gain that is being made from that service, for instance, the charity is providing the service and they're getting a payment for it, but there is a sponsorship or some form or from another company, and that officers are indeed getting some form of benefit from this particular connection, so they're providing the service from that party, that is also not okay. So you cannot charge for that because there is a risk of private pecuniary profit.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. Does having charitable trust status count as being a legal entity?
Yes, but that does not make you a registered charity. So I think there may be the use of charitable trust that is under a piece of legislation. So it's the Charitable Trust Act 1957, and that is actually just a way that the trust is structured. So it's the entity itself, and the Act just creates binding obligations and duties, fiduciary duties, for the trustees. So it is a legal entity, but it is not a instantly charitable charity. Just the word charitable it's just the way it functions, not necessarily that it is a charity.
Do you want to speak to the difference between being a registered charity and a legal entity?
Oh, yes, of course. So a registered charity has very specific obligations under the Act, as we have lovingly said. So they actually have to perform as a charity, that is, provide the public benefit. Whereas a legal entity itself, they will have different commercial interests, private interests. Most trusts, for even charitable trusts, are for private interests. There's a named form of beneficiaries, and it's not open-ended and is not necessarily for the public benefit. So they are not limited in what they can do. The trustees aren't limited in how they distribute their assets and what kind of benefits the beneficiaries obtain. Whereas with a charity, there is limitation on what specific activities could be done, what the officers and the trustees can actually do, because they must ensure that every activity is to promote the charitable status or the charitable purpose of their trust.
But a registered charity can also be a legal entity at the same time.
They can be a charitable trust can be. Sorry, say that.
Registered charity can be a
legal entity, of course, but it doesn't necessarily have to be.
Can you speak to the difference between an organization, a registered charity that may be a legal entity, and a registered charity that might not be a separately legal entity?
Yeah, so an example of this is unincorporated societies. These are just groups of individuals that have come together and have decided to make a group. It's not under any statute, under any act. The main element of these legal entities is that the legal entity provides specific obligations and duties and benefits from the acts that it is incorporated under, whereas an unincorporated group is technically a legal entity in the sense that it is doing a function, it is performing as a charity, and we can recognize that this group functions and has these rules that it has to under their rules, but it's not being governed under a different act other than Charities Act 2005, whereas other legal entities, such as a charitable trust, that is being governed by both the Charitable Trust Act of 1957 and the Charities Act 2005.
Fair enough. And as always, if you're registered in multiple places and you have obligations under multiple acts and laws,
exactly,
you need to meet all of those obligations.
Yeah, and that's what makes it quite difficult for us to blanketly state it, because every individual entity and legal entity will have different obligations under those acts.
And some organizations might not be separate legal entities and might just be made up of individual people.
Exactly, such as, unincorporated groups.
Next question. Common seal with registration number, can this be electronically attached to our invoicing or communications with potential funders? I think this falls under Companies Office because Charity Services doesn't have any requirements around a common seal.
No.
So definitely contact Companies Office with this question. Next up, there's been lots of chat about the changes coming up for charities. Is that correct, or is it more specific about incorporated society type organizations? Do you want me to take this one?
Yeah.
Okay. So across the past couple of years, there have been changes for charities, and that comes from the amendment to the Charities Act 2005 that recently came into effect. That covers quite a few changes about the Act, including changes to the processes that you'll follow and a new requirement to review governance procedures off the top of my head. However, at the same time, there has been a change to the Incorporated Societies Act. And as we've said, those are entirely separate from the Charities Act 2005. So if you're incorporated society, you need to re-register under the new Act. And if you have questions about that, you will need to contact Companies Office directly.
Yeah, I'm also not too sure if this is referring to the changes in tax that is being suggested, like charities tax by inland revenue, and that's inland revenue. Unfortunately, we can't comment on that.
Can you please clarify the difference between a charitable trust and a registered charity?
Yeah, so, okay, a charitable trust, it is just
A structure.
It's a structure. It's just a trust. It's not necessarily charitable in the colloquial sense of, philanthropic. It is a legal entity as the structure is charitable because it can encompass open-ended beneficiaries. So it doesn't necessarily have to have that closed list of beneficiaries that is necessary within a normal trust. Whereas a registered charity, that is a charity, a non-for-profit, philanthropic, exclusively charitable organization.
That is registered.
That is registered. So a charitable trust, all
registered charities are registered charities.
Yeah, and you can be a charitable trust, but you won't necessarily be a charity. But if you're a charity and a charitable trust, you've already fitted into that.
Yeah. They're essentially two different terms that describe different things. So they overlap in a word, and a lot of charitable trusts will also be registered charities.
Yeah.
But being one does not automatically mean that you're the other as well.
It's just a form of legal structure that can take, and a lot of the time charities decide to go under charitable trusts because of the overall fiduciary duties that are just given by the Act itself, like the CTA Act, and that gives the trustees a lot of obligations and duties that they have to do, which gives a higher level of accountability and transparency. And if you're deciding to be an organization and you have the opportunity to do it, some individuals decide to go down that path, but it is really just the structural rather than what it actually does as in philanthropic activities.
I think this is our last question. If a registered charity operates a not-for-profit entity, does that entity need to be registered?
Oh, I think you answered it yourself, not necessarily. If it functions for non-for-profit, you don't need to be registered. You already work. Being a charity it's a legal definition at the end of the day. You have to fit into specific things. Doesn't mean that non-for-profits don't function as charities, but unfortunately non-for-profits don't fit within the definition of this registered charity. Does not mean you can't still function as a philanthropic non-for-profit entity.
So bottom line, if you apply for, if this entity applies for registration and is eligible to be registered, they can be a registered charity, but ultimately they do not have to register or need to register with us. It's ultimately a choice that the entity needs to make by weighing the benefits and the obligations and whether or not it's eligible to do so.
Yeah, and one thing to remember that non-for-profit and being a registered charity, you have to be exclusively charitable, which again is that kind of legal definition, and it limits specific things you can do. Non-for-profit entities don't necessarily have that same obligation, so there is a bit more flexibility in what can be done, which is why some non-for-profits don't actually fit the requirements of being a charity, because there will be, non-compliance elements of that, even though they are participating in non-for-profit. So yes.
Fair enough. So we understand that there was a lot of information in the webinar today. Remember, you can revisit it again as it will be uploaded to our website. We hope that attending today was useful to you. Now you understand more about the benefits and obligations of registration.
If we did not get to your questions, please reach out to us via email or on the phone. Thank you for attending today.